Good morning. On behalf of General President Harold Schaeberger and General Treasurer Ed Kelly, I would like to welcome you to today's live stream workshop, which is titled Women Firefighters and Their Occupational Health. My name is James Ridley. I'm the Assistant to the General President for Education, Training, and Human Relations. Our presenters for this morning's workshop are Dr. Sarah Janke and Lieutenant Heather Buren. Dr. Janke is a PhD and senior scientist of the Center of Fire, Rescue, and EMS Health Research at the National Development and Research Institutes, USA. Dr. Janke has served as the principal investigator on several large-scale cohort and intervention studies of the health and readiness of the U.S. Fire Service, funded by the Department of Homeland Security, the National Institutes of Health, and the American Heart Association. Current projects include studies focused on health of women in the fire service, research on workplace violence, exposure assessments on the fire ground, and randomized controlled trials of wellness interventions. She serves as a co-investigator of several other studies focused on fitness, nutrition, and health behaviors in both firefighters and military populations. Through her work, she has published more than 100 peer-reviewed articles on the health of first responder, military, and veteran populations. Dr. Sarah Janke. Heather Buren is a lieutenant with the San Francisco Fire Department. Entering the fire department in 1997, she cross-trained as a firefighter paramedic in 2002, then promoted to lieutenant in 2010. Heather is a principal investigator of the Women's Firefighter Biomonitoring Collaborative Study, a scientific study that examined exposures to chemicals linked to breast cancer. Heather's interest in health and wellness, coupled with her grave concerns regarding the staggering breast cancer rates among her firefighter community, became the catalyst for this important work. Heather is past president and current board member of the United Fire Services Women, which is an employee advocacy group that is committed to directly involved in recruitment, retention, promotion, and education of women in the San Francisco Fire Department. Heather and local scientists are currently involved in a study looking at post-fire exposures in the same populations. Heather Buren. At the conclusion of this workshop, you will have a better understanding of the important role that science has in our community. The fact that there are little to no cost steps that can be taken to support you having a safer and healthier lifestyle will be made clear to our audience. Sure.
Good morning. I am excited and honored to be joining Dr. Sarah Janke in discussing occupational health of women firefighters. My mom always told me to know my audience. So I'm just gonna take a second. How many firefighters and first responders, EMT paramedics, by a show of hands, do I have in the audience today? What about scientists or environmental health advocates? Musicians? I mean, we are in we are in Nashville. And then I'm also just going to give you a little disclaimer. Like most of you, I am a firefighter. I am not a scientist. And so I'm going to, in advance, ask for your forgiveness as I talk about some of the chemicals that we're going to discuss today. If I mispronounce them or I stumble a little bit, just be kind. Thank you. And then today, Jim gave us a little overview of what we're hoping you'll get out of here, but I will be talking about how and why firefighters and scientists came together in San Francisco to conduct the research that we did. And I will discuss the results of that women firefighter biomonitoring study. And then Sarah is gonna, I'll give it over to Sarah. She will discuss reproductive health concerns among women firefighters, explore department policy, maternity leave issues, and then we'll come back together at the end and just talk a little bit about why science is important to our profession and how is it actionable. I promise you, if I don't digress too much, we will leave some time at the end for questions. I think that that's really important. The International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, you probably heard it a few times in this last week, classified our occupation of firefighting as possibly carcinogenic. The only time a profession was reviewed by IARC. So 23 years ago when I entered the fire service, I knew that firefighting was a dangerous job. I knew running into a building when everyone else is running out was dangerous. I knew that saving lives in a really bad automobile accident, going in and doing rescues was dangerous. In San Francisco, we have a lot of high-angle cliff rescues, believe it or not. We have water rescues. I knew that that was dangerous when I was 25 years old. But not until 6 years ago did I know that firefighting was dangerous because of our exposures to multiple toxic compounds. I had no idea that this profession was dangerous because it was carcinogenic, possibly carcinogenic. I'm not a scientist, but I would say it's definitely carcinogenic. And so that is what we will talk a little bit about today. And now I will digress for a second. And just most of you, I saw a lot of hands go up for firefighters and first responders. So I think you understand us in that how we manage the chaos and the death that we see all the time. How we manage that is, I believe, is by kind of an instantaneously, we separate ourselves from what we're dealing with. We use our knowledge and skills and abilities to come in and manage and mitigate a scene, danger scene, but we separate ourselves from our patients. We separate ourselves by instantaneously saying, I know. Like, I don't realize I do this now after so many years, but that wouldn't be me pulling this guy out of a car that's wrapped around a telephone pole because I wouldn't be going 100 miles an hour down Geary Street drunk. Or that wouldn't be me in respiratory arrest from drugs because I'm not an addict. I don't have, so we're constantly separating ourselves from that. And 6 years ago, in 2012, 2013, I looked around and I had 5 of my women firefighter friends, coworkers, in 1 year diagnosed with a really aggressive form of breast cancers. And so all of a sudden, the way that I dealt with separating myself from everything that I saw in my job, from that wouldn't be me, from that fear, all of a sudden I couldn't do that because I looked to my right and my friend Neen, who just had a double mastectomy, was one of the strongest women I knew, was on her knees from the treatment of this cancer. That was me. That was somebody who was in my age range, that was in my profession, in my city, that might even been in my firehouse. So all of a sudden, how can I separate myself? And I think as a profession, we have now had to turn and face cancer. Face this, and I'm talking about breast cancer today, but it's really a metaphor for all cancers in the fire service and even nationally. But we are getting cancer at astronomical rates, and we can't ignore it, and I don't feel like we have. But in 2012, 2013, we were really, so we became concerned, or I became concerned, and I'll just say when I say we, it's really United Fire Service Women. At the time I was the president. We are an employee organization. You heard Jim recognize what we are, all under the hood of our local union, Local 798. There's a lot of employee organizations. We're a big department. And so we just started looking around, and we were concerned about these elevated rates of cancer in our women firefighters. So we had to step into that fear, because that's really what that was, the fear that that's happening to my friend and coworker, or even a deeper fear that that could be me. I don't want that to be me. And so what did we do? We wanted to learn about it. So I step into that, take a breath, I step into that fear and say, okay, well, we should do some research. Let's see what's happening with other women firefighters nationally and internationally. So we go to do that, and we didn't find anything. And so, at that time, 2013, cancer was well characterized in male firefighters, and it was starting to be talked about. Like, I really think these last 5 to 8 years, there's been a lot of change in the discussion. But there was nothing on women firefighters. And so women, what I've learned since, are often overlooked and chronically understudied in occupational exposures, and the firefighter community is no different. There was none. And these are just, I'm just going to show you a couple. This was 2012-13. These are just a couple of news articles about women firefighters. This one in particular was my friend Denise Alarms, who is no longer with us, and she did a lot of fights for her benefits. She had to fight for her benefits while she was dying. And Neen, this another one just with flame retardants. We were testing. We did a lot of work with flame retardants. This is my friend Neen Nicholson, who is our chief of San Francisco Fire Department now. She just was chosen to be chief in the last couple of months. So here we are. We want to understand what's going on. We do some research. We can't find anything. And so we're firefighters, and we're action-oriented people. Okay, we don't have a solution for this. Let's jump in and figure out how to do it. Let's do our own research. Let's see what we can find. And so our question really, I've learned a lot coming into this, and in science you have an initial question, and our question was really clear to us. So why was our profession causing breast cancer in our women firefighters? And if it was, what could we do about it? And while we're continuing to do the job that we love. Really, in a chain of events happened, quick succession that allowed us to move forward in this scientific studies. So we had the support right off the bat of the San Francisco Firefighter Cancer Prevention Foundation. And really briefly, the foundation was formed by a retired captain, Tony Stefani, in 2006 for the purpose of early detection and prevention of cancer in our firefighters in San Francisco. They do so much more. They do cancer screenings. They assist our sick firefighters in negotiating the whole workers' comp thing. They are leading in prevention in San Francisco. They have so much money for, they actually, supporting that prevention methods. They do so much. But at this time in 2012, 2013, we went to, and they're connected. Tony is connected. He's a very dynamic and driven type A man, and he's very connected. Went to him, and he introduced us to a self-proclaimed citizen scientist, my friend and coworker, Cheryl Patton, who is sitting in the audience here. Raise your hand, Cheryl. He introduced us to Cheryl, and then she introduced us to Rachel Morella-Frosch, who is our main scientist. She is a scientist and is a professor at UC Berkeley. Then we were also introduced to a group of people with the breast cancer prevention partners in Silent Springs. And before we know it, it was a lot of hard work, a little bit of luck. We came together as a group, and we wrote a grant, and we were funded by the California Breast Cancer Research Program. So San Francisco is ideal for a study on women firefighters because we have a lot of women firefighters. We had, I think this slide says 225, but we have approximately more than that now, not just firefighters and first responders, so EMTs and paramedics, because we're not all cross-trained. We have a big, and that's up to 15% is really, we're the highest in any metropolitan area in the US Fire Department. So this is our study team. Like I said, we had our firefighter organizations, science teams, and environmental health advocates. So the Women Firefighter Biomonitoring Collaborative was born. Our community is, sorry, it's hot here. Excuse me. Not used to suit jackets. Surprise, surprise. The United Fire Service, the Women's Biomonitoring Collaborative was born, and our community-based participatory research team composed of who we have up here. And I want to just talk about that really quick. What is CBRP, Community-Based Participatory Research? It's a form of research that puts the community, we are the community, the female firefighters, in partnership with scientists on equal footing. So we share equal deciding power and decisions. We all worked really hard together. The traditional kind of top-down power dynamic often seen in research is this was different. That's where the scientists create a question, they go and find their community. This was very different because because we were dying and we were getting sick, we created our question and went and found the scientists to help us with that. So I think that was interesting. We also, in that research, that also doesn't mean that they just take our blood and then we go. We did and were involved in every aspect of this study. We helped write the study questionnaires. Like, you don't realize that firefighting is a foreign language to scientists. It starts with what's the difference between an engine and a truck. I mean, it's a language, and you don't realize that until you sit down with scientists and they need help. So when you're writing a questionnaire, we recruited participants. We were the main recruiters. We're asking, it's a trust thing when you're recruiting people. We collected samples. We participated in report back of study results. So we were really every aspect of it. But back to our question, was our profession causing cancer? Well, pretty soon off, our main scientist, Rachel, came in and said, look, that's a really good question, but I'm going to tell you right now that I can't answer that question in that way. So what you're asking for is a cohort study, and I can't tell you if your job is causing cancer. Cohort studies, there's challenges and limitations. There's long latency period for breast cancer. They're really expensive. The statistical power to assess the cancer risk is hard, which means we have a lot of women, but actually the number of breast cancer cases is small. And in the fire service, we don't track that very well. And so there's a lot of reasons. She said, I can't do that. But what we can do, we came up with study design that got at the question indirectly. So essentially, we'll do an exposure study. So I can focus, she said, we can focus on the chemicals that are potential breast carcinogens. And so that just means, that's like language just saying that they have done studies that these carcinogens, these specific chemicals have been identified to cause mammary tumor development in animals. And so really what that is called is biomonitoring. Biomonitoring, we take blood and urine or other things from your body, and in a one-shot deal, we look at what's in those. So another little, really quick, biomonitoring is measuring the chemicals in your blood and urine and other things. Yesterday, actually, when I was at Charles' PFAS and PFOA presentation, somebody in there said that biomonitoring helps focus science. And I really liked that, actually, because you're looking at something and then you can dig deeper once you find some of the you're looking at. So the limitations of biomonitoring are also vast, but the main one for us is that it doesn't tell us where these exposures come from. So you see that you have it in your body, but it doesn't tell you where it comes from. And so to understand where that is, you have to ask a lot of questions about just about your behavior and about how you work and where you work. And so in addition to collecting the blood and urine, we asked all those questions in that questionnaire. It was like an hour-long questionnaire. And then that helps to explain like who has higher versus lower chemical exposures and why. So through June 2014 to March 2015, we recruited and collected samples from 80 women firefighters and 80 office workers that worked for our HSS system in San Francisco. They were of the same age range, and that was really, the only thing you couldn't do is be a smoker. So we didn't allow smokers. And we're in California, we don't have a lot of smokers, or maybe we have closet smokers. So we came together, and convenient sampling is what they called. So that's really whoever came to us, who we recruited. And again, we did all aspects of this. This is one of our firefighters. She was pregnant at the time. She's got a couple kids now. It was a few years ago. She was, in the labs doing some of this work. We did all aspects of it. And again, just that questionnaire became really important. We were asking all sorts of occupation-specific questions. How and where and when you wear your PPE, and shift work stuff. When are you working? Are you working overtime? Chronic stress in your life. What chemicals you use on your body, and what chemicals you use and products you use in your home, like how you eat. Crazy, lots and lots of questions, because they're going to take those. Remember, biomonitoring can't tell you where these chemicals come from. So the highlights then I'm just going to talk briefly about the highlights. And the two ones that I will discuss today are the per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. See? We call them PFAS chemicals. We'll just stick with that now, right? And then we'll also talk about the polybrominated diethyl ethers. I've got that one down. PPDEs, which are compounds that are found in flame retardants. So those are the two that we'll be looking at. And there was we've had a lot of talk in this conference, I think it's fantastic, about PFAS chemicals. So I'm not going to go into that, but we'll just really give you briefly where they're found. They have grease and water-resistant properties and are commonly added to food packaging like pizza boxes, frozen foods, takeout containers. They're also added to fabrics, furniture, carpets for stain and water resistance. Think about your rain jackets, or they're also added to our turnout gear, as we know, and AFFF firefighting foam is where we're finding those. So we get exposed to PFAS chemicals through inhalation and ingestion, and then a little less is the dermal exposure, so through your skin. And these chemicals, PFAS, PFOA chemicals, they're persistent in people and the environment, even though they started to be phased out in 2000. But they persist in our homes, in our gear, in our foams, and they are bioaccumulative. It's a science word where it adds up. They have nice words for shit adds up. So our results. Scientists love graphs. I love pictures. Scientists love graphs. We're going to go quickly through it. So we tested 12 different PFAS chemicals, and we identified 8 indetectable levels. All of our office workers and our scientists had PFAS chemicals, and there were 3 where we saw a difference from firefighters and office workers. And so it was this PAFHXS is your first one, and the PFNA. We found them in both of those. And really, I mean, ultimately with these, what we found was that we were higher than the national average, the NHANES, and we were a little bit higher than our office workers, but not excessively. Something I found interesting, this graph is showing you what aspects of firefighting were most related to exposures. So we found, and this also doesn't surprise any of us that have been out there in the field and fighting fires, that officers and frontline firefighters had higher levels of a couple different of these chemicals than our drivers, our AOs. We're going in, we're doing active firefighting. Usually they're also, they're out running our pump, giving us our water for our lives. So that doesn't make, that wasn't, but I think it's interesting. And I saw some, you know what, actually I'm not going to digress. It's interesting. God, that was good. Whew. So for flame retardants, we looked at 10 different compounds, and firefighters were higher than office workers in all of them, but 2 significantly. And so the top ones that you see, so the BDCPP, which is a chlorinated tryst flame retardant, you find that in plastics, textiles, and foams. And then the one, that was the second one down. The one right above it, BCEP, that's a close cousin to tryst. And so it's used in the same ways, same products, plastics, foams, couches, mattresses. There was actually a study with that chemical that linked mammary tumors in rats. So scientists really like that when they have been able to link those, because then they can infer. I mean, we're not rats. Well, some of us are, but but you got my gist. And then the last one was a DBUP. So that's a neurotransmitter. It affects brain development function. It's non-chlorinated, but you see that in a lot of other products, not just flame retardants. So the thing to note about this is that really the differences between office work and firefighters is that firefighters, the 50th percentile, and that means that anyone 50% below has this chemical. The 50th percentile in firefighters was closest to the 95th percentile in office workers. And so again, that 95th, so 95% of those participants were below that level. So we were significantly higher. And the last one on flame retardants, it's a different color, so you should enjoy that, and there's some stars and things like that. But the thing that's interesting about this one, too, again, to us, if I had more hands for scientists, then I would ask Charles to come up here and explain these more, but I hope you guys are okay that I'm just kind of flying through, not trying to explain what I really am not good at explaining. So, but what is interesting about this is that the levels in firefighters, so what you see here is you median in like the 95th percentiles, it's those little stars. So and NHANES is a national health and nutrition survey. So it's done biannually, studies designed to assess the health and nutrition status of U.S. citizens. So this one is a biannual. So scientists also like to, you like to have compare. We compare you to the national this and that. So what's interesting about this is that firefighters were equal to children in this specific flame retardant. And children tend to be much higher because they do a lot more of running around on the floors and crawling around on the floors. There's a lot of flame retardants left over still in our carpets, and then they're putting their hands in their mouths. So we were higher. I mean, so it's mostly that. That was what was interesting to me on that one. See, if I try to explain more, then I catch myself up, so I'm just moving along. All of this and these numbers and those chemicals come together. So, cancer doesn't develop all at once. It doesn't develop the same in everybody. It happens through a series of changes of body processes, and that collectively transform normal cells to aggressive cancer cells. We don't understand how, I definitely don't, and scientists don't even understand how that all works. But many chemicals that interfere with these processes are considered carcinogens or partial carcinogens. But they might not cause cancer by themselves, but then the exposures or the combination of these substances start to overwhelm the body's defenses, and that might result in cancer. So firefighters are exposed to known carcinogens, hundreds of other chemicals. Firefighters, occupational soldiers can really be described as a chemical soup. At some fires, we're exposed to 1,500 different chemicals at any given fire. And a lot of those haven't been tested or they can't be tested. So why I think that is interesting is we don't need scientists to tell us that when we come out of a fire, we worked really hard and it was very smoky, that we feel like shit. We don't need them to tell us that. But these are some of the chemicals that are found on a fire ground. Just a few. I mean, we've all seen those lists of many. Some of these can't be tested, but you could have any number of combination of all of these chemicals. And so here we go with one other part of our study. We did, you saw the results from PFAS chemicals and flame retardants. Well, they also did this generalized suspect screening. So, and what that is, and I will really try to explain this well, and even, always like questions, but if you don't understand it, don't ask me questions, please, on this one. But I am going to try. So we use this general suspect screening method. It's also called non-targeted approach to look for these compounds that we might not be studying. That also are linked to potential breast carcinogens. Maybe we would find some out. So this generalized suspect screening is a multi-step process that allows us to look at what we know is present. So what scientists call the known unknown. They know there's stuff there, they might just not know what it is. So briefly, these steps, they have their serum, they analyze that serum, and they use a high-resolution mass spectrometry. They spin the shit out of it. And it gives molecular weights, peak areas, and retention times, and detection frequencies, how they identify different chemicals. And next step is they match those to a library that they already have of those high resolution, from that spectrometry, and then they get a general suspect list. So you can just kind of follow that through, and then process and analyze that list for candidate compounds to determine if these compounds meet criteria for what that they could understand and look at. So that final step is using those targeted methods. They measure the concentration. That's a lot of words, but really it's being able to look at what might be in my blood on a given day after a fire or something, and not be. They might find things that they didn't even know were there. And so it's a way to focus science. It goes back to what biomonitoring is. And here is just, I'm not explaining this one to you. It's just, I wanted you to visually see, to me, that's what that toxic soup is. This is all of our firefighters. This is our different, each line is our bloods and all these different chemicals that they don't necessarily know what they are until they start to look at them. And that is that toxic soup that I just feel like it's important to say that, because we're never really going to know. And when we come back together at the end of this, I'll explain why I think that that's important, that more if the unknown, the known unknown, what can we do about it? So I'm going to step back and let Dr. Jenke, oh, you know what? Actually, I got a few more, sorry. I'm not going to step back yet. the WFBC, the Women Firefighter Biomonitoring Collaborative, started this ball rolling of scientific studies. And so some of the other things that we're working on right now, we have just recently been funded, and we're currently, we are working by the CBCRP to be working with nurses. So we're looking at occupational exposures in nurses, and then they will compare those to our levels as firefighters. And in this second study that we're working on is the nurses study. We also got some money to do post-fire analysis on women firefighters. So some of the same women that were in our initial study will do post-fire analysis. And that is really just taking blood 24 hours post-fire. And as you know, it's much harder to do that because you have to follow the fires. You got to make sure somebody was at that fire. It takes longer, but we're 24 hours, 1 week, and then 1 month post-fire. And then we've also, we're able to roll in some of our study and the scientists working in the study I know that you've all heard of the fires that we've been having in Northern California a few years ago, the Tubbs fire, which we do have results from, and I believe that Charlotte gave some of those, and then also just recently, the campfires too. And so we're starting to biomonitor the firefighters from that. And now I'm going to step back and let Dr. Jenke talk, and I'll be back. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about reproductive health and what we found in some of the research that we've been doing, but huge fan of the work coming out of San Francisco and your team. If there's such a thing as like a fangirl of researchers, I follow your stuff closely. So it's excellent work. If anyone is looking for some fascinating scientific reading, I highly recommend it. Because everyone is, right? I know. So I'm going to talk about reproductive health and what we've talked to a lot of women around the country about, and some of the qualitative findings and quantitative findings. I'm in a strong commitment to being here and being honored to be here. I have myself gotten pregnant as a kind of model for talking about this topic. You're welcome. But a lot of this stuff hits really close to home, especially as I went to work and told him I was pregnant and got kind of like a response. And I'm like, we just sit behind a desk. Like, I don't know what you guys are freaked out about. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the endocrine disrupting chemicals. Heather did a great job of covering some of the PFAS and the flame retardants. I'm going to talk a little bit about endocrine disrupting chemicals and what we know about how that relates to reproductive health, and then some early findings of some of the work that we've done. Now, there's not a lot of work, like she mentioned, on women in the fire service and these specific outcomes. So some of this work is kind of new and hasn't been done before. But one of the things that we can do is look backwards. So we know that there are endocrine disrupting chemicals that have been found on the fireground, looking at the work of like Kenny and UL. NIST and the group out of Illinois has documented this. And we know from the literature that at low dose effects, so the endocrine system is kind of what controls the hormone signaling into the body and the systems of the body. So everything from puberty for women and men to how your body functions, so periods across time, that type of stuff. We know from the literature that even low-dose effects of, to exposures of endocrine disrupting chemicals has some pretty significant implications. Animals, they found that it can alter brain development, alter development of reproductive tracts, and then early onset of puberty when people are when animals are exposed to endocrine disrupting chemicals. We also know that early development exposures contribute to things like infertility and genital tract abnormalities, obesity, and ADHD, and then also cancer. So these are exposures that are occurring like as when women are pregnant, early, young, and really small and young children, right? So these exposures we know, and I would just like to say that I cringed when you talked about all the flame retardants kids are exposed to, but kids are disgusting if you think about it, and all that licking things. And I have a 3-year-old and he's gross, but I say that with love. So when we look at reproductive health concerns, IFF did a fantastic job more than a couple years ago, putting together some summaries of these risks. But in general, in terms of quantitative findings around this, little known about child health impacts and the occupational exposures. And concerns are everything from the chemical exposures, which endocrine disrupting chemicals, biological and the radiologic exposures, but also shift schedules. I'll talk a little bit about that and what we know. Then the extreme physiological strain of emergency response. It's not an easy job, right? And then the high ambient temperatures and noise. When we talk about kind of what we know are the health effects, we look through that list, and it's some of the things that you already described, but when you look back through the literature on the exposures and what you see from these carcinogenic, now I can't say the words either, you know what I mean, the exposures of the chemicals, the bad stuff, PBDs in the literature have been linked to things like lower IQ among offspring. So it changes the way the brain functions when women are exposed to that during pregnancy. PFAS disrupts the immune system development and the thyroid development and functioning. And the thyroid really controls, as far as the endocrine system goes, that's where a lot of the chemical signals come from. The polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, yes, do damage to DNA. There's also a lot of research that looks at implications for cognitive functioning, behavior problems, allergies, and asthma. And then the phthalates can change the fetal sex hormone levels, can also contribute to later obesity, can cause some problems with fertility. There's data on female fertility issues in preterm. I'm not going to leave the men in the room out because I want to be inclusive, so I will mention fertility in men and talk about what's going on with sperm later. It's kind of to get you excited for later in the presentation. You're welcome. You're like, I'm really glad I came to this today. Who knew it would be so exciting? When we talk about, I mentioned shift work earlier, and that was one of the things that the IFF had called out early as maybe contributing. There's a fantastic book. If you want to be scared into better sleep, read this book by Dr. Walker, Why We Sleep. He's out of California, because we know great things come out of California. And he does a wonderful job of overviewing and really synthesizing all the research on sleep. And you will never prioritize sleep more than you have after reading his book and all the negative outcomes. But he talks a little bit about pregnancy and women's risk of miscarriage. And you actually do find, if you look at women who are pregnant and sleep less than 8 hours a night, have an increased risk for miscarriage. And so it has a lot to do with, he talks about the cycles and the REM sleep and the different cycles and processes that occur in your body while you sleep. Fantastic, awesome stuff. But on the downside, also not sleeping enough can cause miscarriage. And it also can affect, in terms of fertility, routinely sleeping less than 6 hours can cause that 20% increase or decrease in follicular release of hormones. So the other interesting thing that I think about sleep, and I know this is not a presentation on sleep because that kind of affects everyone, that a lot of people say, I just don't need the 8 hours, or I've been on the job for a long time, and so I've just really gotten used to it. And what they find is that there's a genetic marker for people who can sleep less than 8 hours. So it does exist, it does happen. You're more likely to be struck by lightning, according to Dr. Walker, than you are to have that. And people are really bad at estimating how good they are at sleep, or how good their sleep was, how tired they are. Horrible at it. So if they did these really cool studies where they put people in a lab, and so they could control everything that they did. And what they found, when they shortened sleep, people would say, I feel fine, I feel pretty rested, I'm fine. They weren't. So when they did tests of reflexes and cognitive functioning and all those types of things, they were not good at estimating that. So read that if you want to be scared. It's really fantastic. The work that we did around reproductive health, so we had our very first study that was focused specifically on women in the fire service. We designed, because when we went out and did cohort studies, we had as many as we could. So one study was 799 firefighters, and I think we had around 42 women in that study. And the second study was 1,009 firefighters. And again, small sample of women. And when we tried to publish that work, the editors of the journals would always say, especially because we were looking at often cardiovascular risk factors, the editors would send back, you have to take the women out of the sample because it's not a large enough sample to do statistical comparisons. And we decided that through that and talking to folks in the fire service, we needed to design something specifically focused on women. So we did, and it was not specific to reproductive health. So some of the findings that I am sharing with you are kind of the pilot data that we used to get a second study that is being analyzed right now. So we have better, we didn't realize how much we didn't ask until we got the first round of data back. But we did ask several questions about reproductive health, and part of it that I'm going to share is the qualitative piece. And so we did interviews and focus groups with women in the fire service, people in leadership positions, both men and women, which was fascinating. And one of the domains in there was reproductive health. And I have never had a focus group where I was more convinced I was going to have to break up a physical altercation than when we started talking about reproductive health and what women thought about their pregnancy and when they went off the line, when they thought you should report to the department. So I'll tell you a little bit about the almost violence that ensued in that. But we worked with 46 women who were active firefighters and then 43 fire service leaders. And we did what we call qualitative data analysis. So you put it into a program and you basically sort every single word and statement that was said into different themes. And you find that a lot of themes are consistent across groups, and then you start grouping it and summarizing it. So basically that's a fancy way of saying we read it and summarized the data. We do really like to put some big words to it because I like to talk about the interocular test, where you look at people. Yeah, and you can see. We talk about that with misclassification of BMI. Anyway, we did find that reproductive health was a major concern. It was something that people really talked about, women really talked about and were interested in, and men often talked about but were scared to death of in terms of policies, procedures, what should be done. It was interesting because we talked to, there were a couple of men I talked to in pretty high leadership positions around the country, and I would say, what do you think about this topic? And they go, I don't think I'm the person to ask. And I'm like, you are in a leadership position in the fire service on health and wellness, you are exactly the person that I need to ask, and the fact that you haven't thought of this is really telling about where we're at. So good news, there's a ton of work to be done in this area, job security for at least my next 5 kids. I'm gonna have to keep getting pregnant though so I can do these presentations. Just totally kidding, I'm done after this one, which some will tell you I said after the last one, but for real this time. So we had 5 key themes that really came out around the topic when we talked to women and to men. So there's a huge variation in department policies, if department policies even exist around pregnancy and maternity leave. It's usually the decision-making of the firefighter in terms of when they want to disclose the pregnancy. That was a heated topic of debate. There did seem to be a consensus that there's a lack of education and research, which I did confirm when women would say, okay, so what data is out there about this? I'd go, well, actually none, but we'll work on that. Check back with me in 5 years because it takes forever to analyze data. But then also that reproductive health, a lot of people really perceive that had issues related to recruitment and retention. So were you going to go into a job that may or may not have any interest in what to do with you once you get pregnant? And then also there were a lot of discussion around departments. Some departments that I take that back. There wasn't a lot of discussion around departments that do it really well, but there was some discussion around departments that manage this really well. So we'll talk a little bit about that too. When I say there was wide variation about what policies are out there, that's everything from departments that are incredibly proactive and have, from the minute you find out you're pregnant, they know exactly what to do with you, to departments who have never even thought about it. And keep in mind that these were all, when we were talking to women in this, and when I share the policy, one of the questions is, well, maybe they didn't have women in the departments, but from the data, we were collecting it from women. So there were departments that definitely had women in them, and still a lot didn't have any policies. So a lot said either they didn't have any policy or that their policy was pretty unfavorable for women. And the one consistent message we got around policy issues was you do not want to be the first person for them to have to make a policy around. Just because everyone's then staring at you, you're under a microscope and all your, why does she want it that way? What would she expect for that? So wide variation in that topic, and I'll share a couple more stories about that later. But in terms of when do you disclose that you're pregnant to the department, right? And we have some numbers on this, but this is where people just got in huge arguments. And at one point I'm sitting between two women. I really hate conflict, so it was very awkward for me. One went off the line the minute she found out she was pregnant. She'd had a miscarriage before. She said, I'm not going to sacrifice this pregnancy for the job. As soon as I found out I was pregnant, I went to the department and told them I need to go off the line. Another woman who fought a 3-alarm fire the day before she delivered. And both had really justifiable approaches to why they did what they did. The woman who was on the job was like, I didn't want to appear weak. I didn't want people to think that I was just trying to, to skate the system or trying to get off with paid leave. They depend on me. And I knew I could do it. And I thought, that sounds awful. I'm 22 weeks pregnant and I can barely walk up the steps. But she really felt like she could handle it. And so she didn't think that she needed to be off the line. Also, some other super practical reasons. So there was a woman, we've had a couple women in our groups where they were married to another firefighter. Shift schedules were opposite shift schedules. And so they were able to take care of kids that way. And she said, if one of us goes to a 40-hour work week, it screws everything up, right? Not only does it screw up childcare, but then pays shifts because you're not working the same number of hours. She said, it's just really impossible for us to maintain our life. And then also, and it shocks me that in 2019, this is an issue, but I talked to women who were fired because they got pregnant, because you technically couldn't fulfill the job task. Department didn't have any light duty activities for them. So then they got fired. Right, I was shaking my head too, but that was a consistent message. So I actually happened to be talking to a fire chief from Canada earlier in the week, and she said, "So how many months do you get for maternity leave here?" And my project coordinator just came back from maternity leave, and she's like, "Well, I took 11 weeks." And the look of horror on her face, she goes, "We get 18 months, and we can trade it off between mom and dad. We can, she said, we have 18 months to go through that." And I was like, well, the 5 weeks that I wish Hannah would have taken was probably not anywhere near that. But that's just not the way it is here, right, in the United States. So a lot of discussion around even when you disclose this to the department and how they handle it. When women and men talked about the lack of education, there was universal agreement that there wasn't enough out there. And one of the challenges with it, consistently women and leadership folks and chiefs would say, we let the woman and her OB decide when to come off the truck. That was the most common answer that we got in terms of when you go off the truck. So I thought this was interesting. So I went and talked to a couple OBs, and I said, so let's say you have a woman who's a firefighter who comes in and says, I'm pregnant. When do I go off the truck? And they went, I would go look at the standard for that. There's not a standard, right? It's barely, and what OB knows, 1582 even exists, because there is some data in there, but there's not a standard for that. And so the follow-up question, if I said, well, what if the American College of ACOG, American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, doesn't have a recommendation on this for OBGYNs? And I said, so then next, what would you, if that didn't exist, say, what would you do? And they said, well, I would ask her when she felt ready to come off. Well, if you're the woman who fought to the 3-alarm fire the day before she delivered, she's never going to say she wants to come off. And now that we have more data, I'll show some miscarriage data. I think if OBGYNs knew a little bit more about what they were releasing people to duty for, I think it might kind of change the minds, or at least would provide the opportunity for some educated, informed decisions about what you're returning someone to duty for. In terms of the impacting recruitment and retention, women did feel like they were penalized for being women. And a lot of times, we're male firefighters, oh, they're having a baby, we're all so excited. This is, for women, they didn't feel that way. That there were often, it was approached with oh, So you're going to be off the line, which then you go to, so if you think about where people are like in seniority and the promotion, like if you're up for a promotion to lieutenant, but you're off for 6 months or 8 months or whatever, if you're the woman, that has implications too. And that's actually 8 months less you spend. It's challenging, I think. And that was what I think was the main message from really all the focus groups, is that it's not an easy issue. It seems so simple when you start talking to people about it and you're like, oh, well, some people are like, oh, well, they should just go off the line as soon as they find out they're pregnant, come back on, after they're all recovered. It's just not that easy, for a lot of practical reasons too. And then where are we kind of headed with this? And where did we think kind of the take-home messages from a qualitative? There were departments that had done a great job of creating opportunities for paid leave during pregnancy. Often women were given the decision to decide and were secured, given job security. I mentioned not all women were. Women have been fired for getting pregnant. Creating modified work assignments that don't feel like punishment. A lot of women said, I went to a light duty job, but it was basically just sitting at a desk, pushing papers back and forth across the desk. There were departments that did a fantastic job of creating like, hey, what's your skill set and what can you do? Those tended to be departments that were really good at that for men too, that it was just kind of like, I don't know, maybe we all deserve that respect as human beings, that, take the skills that you have and use them for the benefit of the department. So that does happen, just less often than we would like to see. And we do know, there was our take-home messages is that we needed to kind of work on these. So we need to get more literature out there about this. We published one on miscarriage that I'm about to show you, but then also get better. We need lots of follow-up research to this. And then looking at the policy design and implementation, education of the firefighter. And then one of the big issues that came up was properly fitting PPE. Like, this belly is not easily going to fit into a set of bunker gear. And I swear I'm twice as big today as I was yesterday. Like, it happens like that. So actually, no, I was pretty big yesterday if you saw me yesterday, but you know what I mean. See, I'm just this is just really super convenient to be able to. You're welcome. I'm so dedicated. So when we did look at the quantitative data on miscarriage, we did find a high rate of miscarriage among women in the fire service. And this was across all pregnancies. So you'll hear numbers like a quarter of pregnancies end in miscarriage. One, it depends on how you ask the question, if you're looking at chemical pregnancies or if you're looking at, once women know that they're pregnant. But we did find a high rate of miscarriage among women in the fire service. Now, follow-up, we asked in the second survey a number of detailed questions about that. What exactly women were doing around the time that they got pregnant. We asked career and volunteer, we asked call volume, those types of things. So we'll have better data on this. We also found a higher rate of preterm birth, which if you think back to the slide I had on the chemicals, some of those were linked to preterm labor. So we did find a higher rate of preterm labor among women that were firefighters compared to general population. And we asked the question about policies. Does your department have policies related to pregnancy? We had almost 2,000 women. These are all career firefighters. What their department had, and you see, at first I was like, oh, only 23% said absolutely that they knew they didn't have, and 20% said they didn't have any policies related to maternity leave. I mean, that's not a large number until you think about 20% of 1,820 women said they didn't have any policies. Like, that's actually, I think that number should be 0 would be but my goal for that every department would have a policy on that. And then the other thing, scientists, you do a survey and you're like, I have this great data. And then you're like, I should have asked all 1,800 of those women a different question. And we asked if they had a policy, but we didn't ask what it was. So you might have seen this in the news. It was got pretty wide coverage, which I appreciated. But a county in Florida where a woman was not allowed to go off the truck for her entire pregnancy because they had a policy around pregnancy. And it was that because pregnancy is not considered an on-the-job injury, you have to stay working because it's not, they had a policy that injuries that occurred off the job, you couldn't go on light duty for. Now, I like to feel like I'm the queen of seeing a way around this. So I think the take-home message is if you get pregnant while at the station, you're welcome. Wait till you hear my justification for day drinking, and it has to do with sleep. But yeah, so we didn't ask, like, what are those policies? My naive assumption was if they have a policy, it would be a good one. Not so. So yeah, take that back as your take home from this presentation. Don't really. I was just kidding. But so when we asked them, when did you report? Most reported at the end of the first trimester, which makes sense. So like 12 weeks pregnant is usually, you're past that first risk of miscarriage. That's usually when women let their friends and family know. That's kind of the tipping point for a lot. Now the challenge with that is the teratogen exposure that's like highest risk to the fetus is in that first 12 weeks. So it's the really early development. So while it seems like, oh, we're going to let grandma know and the fire department know at the same time, maybe that's not the best way to do things. And maybe with the, we didn't ask any questions about miscarriage beyond whether it was a miscarriage. So we'll have more data about when those occurred. But most didn't restrict their duty till the second or third trimester, which really, once that little kiddo's, kind of developed, gets less dangerous as the pregnancy goes on. But 10% did not restrict their duties at all during pregnancy. Sounds awful to me, but I'm also kind of a wimp. Usually the decision was a joint decision, so, but women with the physician, but like I said, a lot of times there was a lack of awareness or education at OBGYN, so they didn't know kind of what they were really saying. I mean, it sounds like, oh yeah, I think if you say, I mean, it's with any injury, right? You go to your doctor and you're like, oh, my job, I'm just a driver. Probably you're not going to your doctor if you're trying to get released to go back to duty. You probably don't go back and go, yeah, I'm a driver, who then jumps out of a truck, hooks up a whole bunch of stuff, stands there breathing chemicals. And I mean, I think sometimes if you said that type of stuff, it would maybe be treated a little bit different. So I think definitely resources for firefighters and physicians, then research and education on risks. Because I do think a lot of women would probably make different choices if they knew what risks there were. And that's what I think, where I think we've kind of failed in this area as scientists, that I think we need to be better about researching and putting that out there. I will say the IFF has a fantastic stance on this, really pro-pregnancy, be supportive of women in the departments, and let them be on light duty, let you have relevant light duty assignments for them. So really proactive on that, and a positive message from them. 1582 does have some information about this in it. If you want something that's drier reading than scientific articles, open up 1582. But they do have some recommendations around it and have cited some of the literature out there. Again, sometimes it's not exactly fire service based, but we know, high ambient temperatures can be dangerous for the fetus. So they have it around that, and then also around the different tasks. So the required job tasks, and some research around that. Now, what about once you have the baby, breast milk, and what do you do for women that are breastfeeding? So we know breastfeeding is like the most amazing cure-all for every malady ever invented. And I did breastfeed my 3-year-old, and I was not aware, not when he was 3. I did not breastfeed him when he was 3. But I wasn't aware of all the things that women use breast milk for. But it's the perfect nutrient source for infants. And I will say, for women who have a difficult time breastfeeding, formulas are awesome, especially if you're in the United States and have access to all of those. They're expensive, but there's still kind of no replacing the beauty of breast milk. But then you can also use it, like all these women were using it to like put on rashes. And what else? Pretty much anything anyone said they had, they're like, oh, just use some of your breast milk on that. And I'm like, that seems really odd, but it's like kind of a cure-all for all sorts of different things they had no idea about. And it also changes across time, like breast milk expressed during the day and breast milk expressed during the night are different. And it also can feed, like if the baby is sick, there's actually like a feedback mechanism within the mother that can produce basically not a medication because but a treatment for that, right? For the infant. So it's really like I think every scientist I've ever met supports the idea that you should be breastfed. Or not you should be breastfed. I take that back. That infants, newborns should be breastfed. I have to be really careful because I also learned some other weird stuff about breastfeeding that I will not go into in this presentation, but infants, it's so beneficial. But then the question is it safe after a fire? Like if you're a female, you're on the fire ground, you go into a fire. Jeff Burgess did some awesome work, and I'm also a huge fan of everything Jeff Burgess has ever published. He's out of Arizona, and he had some women in the Phoenix Fire Department that approached him and asked this question. And he, out of his own lab funds, did a pilot study. And he found, so they measured breast milk post-fire. So before fire, post-fire, 24 and 72 hours after. And based on that data, his recommendation currently is 72 hours of pumping and dumping, which I also assumed everyone knows what that means, but it's just pumping and throwing it away. That's a lot of breast milk to throw away. We had, as part of the FEMA study, they're currently in Arizona, like at this moment, analyzing breast milk that we've collected from a bigger sample. We also did it, he designed it this time around to where we have, because you can have chemicals in your breast milk from everything from like, did you eat grilled meat? So we have women who are firefighters and then also women in the community who aren't firefighters. So we can look at, are there like environmental exposures, things like that. Hopefully we can narrow that window down because 72 hours is a painfully long time to pump and dump. But current recommendation is that. But then I've also received a lot of people who have said, does that mean I should not breastfeed? Absolutely not. Breast milk is so good for babies that we highly recommend you breastfeed even if you have to pump and dump for 72 hours. Because I didn't want to leave anyone out, I'm all about inclusion. Let's talk a little bit about infertility in men and possibilities with the links to the fire service. And we actually, based on the miscarriage data and a lot of feedback that we received from males in the fire service about kind of things that they saw with their kids, we've designed a study. It hasn't been funded yet, but we're going to keep trying till we get it because I think it's such an important topic. But this study is designed really to look at 3 aims. And this study that just came out of Danish firefighters found that they looked at, they have like the best data set ever in this country to look at things like fertility issues. So they looked at men who were accessing the fertility system, or getting infertility treatment, and they found that firefighters, when they took that occupation code out, were 46% more likely to be getting fertility treatments than the general population, than the other occupations in that cohort, which is really interesting if you think about all the endocrine disrupting chemicals that I mentioned before, and I said things about like ovaries. Same system that's disrupted with men. So the study that we proposed, that eventually I'm going to be really positive here, eventually we will get funded somewhere, looks at things like the epigenetics of sperm, and which, so there's a scientist out of, he's currently at Utah that studies this, which I did think like, that's an interesting dinner table conversation. Like, so what do you do? I study sperm. But that is what he does, and he looks at the epigenetics of it, and he looks at how it could change, and then look at also fertility issues. But then the other thing is we've really proposed, and as we pulled this team together with folks from NIOSH and other scientists, looking at offspring, when we started talking about the exposures and the interrupted sleep and all those types of things, these other scientists are like, oh yeah, I would totally expect to see increased rates of attention deficit in the offspring of male and female firefighters, autism spectrum disorders, and maybe even there's some speculation that maybe even some cancers. So with that good news, I'm going to hand it back over to Heather. You're probably glad I'm going at this point. You're welcome.
Thank you, Sarah. It brings up so many personal things from my own children in the fire service and when I went off and how I pumped and how hard that was. There's so many questions with that. Really, it's interesting. This is just a little bit of an aside. What we're going to talk about the action, and this is not on my slides, but it brought it up when you were just talking. And in my fire station, often we're always leaving the door open between our communications room where we're living and app bay. It's always getting left open. And I have signs. I'm like, close these doors, because that's one of our points that we say you should keep those closed. And finally, and this is me interpreting science not in the right way. And I was like, look, you're going to grow breast and your balls are going to shrink if you don't close those doors. I mean, maybe many generations down, and they were like, what? And they started closing the doors. So it's all about action. Anyways, sorry. Yeah, right? So, here we are. And the science lends evidence to support what we already know, that this is a dangerous job on a lot of different levels. But I say this is that when I stepped into this profession, I swore an oath to protect the life and the property of the citizens of our city. And I pull up on a working fire, 3 floors involved. I don't say to my crew, stand down, this looks a little toxic. We're not going to fight this one. Coffee? Obviously, we don't do that, right? We go to work. And that is, we're doing this profession for a lot of different reasons, but one of them is that. And so what we're doing before that fire, before that fully working involved fire, and what we're doing after, that to me is really where this science matters. It's where, it does take a long time for the scientists to process all that data. And in the meantime, I'm like, oh, what? Come on. So it really, it's more about, to me, and what I've taken out of this, and I'll talk a little bit, it's just about the actions that we do and the responsibilities that we have to change our behavior, because it is about that. We can't really talk about this, and many of our states lack presumptive cancer laws, and there was also some really great information at this conference about presumptive laws, if you got a chance to see it. But the laws that, some states have them, some don't. The laws that exist are limited. From what I know, 33 states have some kind of presumptive law for firefighters in relation to cancer. 20 of those states, the language is broad. It can be interpreted to cover a lot of different types of cancer. California is one of those states. But then 13 states, it's very specific what type of cancers. And so it's important to a lot of states are trying to add certain types of cancers to those presumptive lists of cancer. And breast cancer, we're bringing this kind of back to breast cancer because that's what we were studying. There's only 4 states that have breast cancer on their presumptive laws. Does anyone here know any of those states? Anyone know your own state? Well, I'll tell you, Idaho, New Mexico, Oregon, and Virginia are the 4 states that I know of now. This is changing, though. This science is starting to help us, and it's changing. The ultimate goal for me today, for us out there to protect ourselves, is really prevention and education. And I feel like that's where this has taken me in all of these years, is starting to educate myself and my coworkers and y'all, and policy change and regulation. So, implications for policy, local, state and national. I really, my hat's off to the IAFF. I think that the direction that they've been taking to face this disease, cancer, in the fire service has been huge, and starting to change those policies and implications. Again, I've said this, but the science coming out of studies like these that I've highlighted today, it really, again, it lends evidence to support our exposure history, and that's really powerful. Our study can help get breast cancer added to those presumptive laws, and it might seem minor, but when you're fighting for your life, and I saw this with one of my coworkers and friends, she was also fighting for her benefits and monies to take care of her family, and that's fundamentally wrong to me. And so that does lend evidence. Just last year, Mike O'Reilly, he's from Boston Local 718, was calling us saying, do you have results from that study yet? Do you have results from that study yet? I mean, they were doing they're doing amazing stuff in Boston, by the way, but they were doing a really big push and they wanted our results to support the case they were submitting to legislation to add breast cancer to that list. And so it's important in that sense. Again, lastly, it's our own personal, what we're doing, how we can change, but this is really basic, like chemical regulation. So if the products that burn in fires are less toxic, then firefighters will have fewer exposures. We're not scientists, but that's pretty simple, right? So that's this chemical regulation. That process to change is not simple, but Tony Stefani from the Cancer Prevention Foundation he's been working on that. Firefighters, we tend to be good representatives in that sense. So the groundswell in the last 5 to 8 years is changing the narrative for the fire service. I know when I 15 years as a firefighter, I didn't wash my gear. We all know why that was, you know. The dirtier my gear, the saltier I was. And here in San Francisco and nationally, I'm starting to see there's such a change, there's such a different narrative. And so tangibly, what is my interest in this and your interest in this and the science doing? Well, it's changing our behavior. So the culture is slowly changing. What's happened, the change in San Francisco last 4 to 5 years, we have turnout extractors, washing machines in almost all of our firehouses now. We're cleaning them after every fire. We have 2 sets of, so we're a lucky department. We do have 2 sets, so we're able to do that. We have a wet wipes policy to wipe down. We have just written and are implementing and training right now on a gross decontamination on the fireground policy. It's like these actionable things. We're discussing it, we're talking about it. I'm seeing all these young people coming in, and it's this, you know, Coombs' little picture here, like you can't, you know, this is changing. And it's really exciting to me to see that happening. I hope, well, you know what, we'll talk with this, but I'd be curious in your own departments if you're seeing change, if this is happening in your own departments, and if anyone, we can talk about it when we have a little bit of time here, but if you want to come up and after, I'm always interested in what it is your departments are doing and how I can help that or how I can model what you're doing. It's, you know, it's communication that we're putting it together. Knowledge really is that foundation for how we're going to change our behavior and the commitment. And I have the commitment, and I think you guys being here, you have to step in and have that commitment. And so I will just leave you, because I can't help myself, with a few tangible tips, 5 tips to reduce exposure in the fire station. These are tips, things that we can all do that don't cost us or our department very much money, but that we're really finding can really reduce the time and your exposure levels. So you store your turnouts in closed lockers and gears and bags. I'm going to do this fast because I think you probably know this. We've been seeing a lot of best practices, but I got to do it. Keep doors closed between the apparatus floor and the living bay. Use might if you need to. Wipe down the vehicle and the cab interior every day. That wasn't happening at all, and that's happening a lot more in our department. You know, don't sweep the apparatus floor. Don't just sweep it because you need something to do. Just wet mop it. And if you happen to have, you know, you're a department that has, you know, vacuum cleaner with a HEPA filter, use that. And then all the time, use your exhaust system. Use your station's exhaust system all the time. And then on the fire ground, SCBA. From initial attack through the completion of overhaul, use it. Not going to talk about that anymore, but just we know that. Use wet wipes to clean your hands, your jaw, your neck, and your face after any fire operations, and do it right after. Just have them in your rig and wipe down. Get it off of your skin. Do gross decon on the fire ground. Dr. Kenny Fent did an amazing study. I saw results of how, like the percentage, you can just a wet soap wash down of your gear really fast after, it can remove so many carcinogens, and then you're not bringing them into your cab. I mean, if you have a situation in place where you can put your gear into a sealed bag and hop in your rig and get back, that's good. We don't have that yet in San Francisco, but I mean, I guess that's the gold standard. Shower as soon as you get back. Historically, we get back and we get our rig back together. We clean all our tools, we do that, we get our rig back together. They're saying now, just go get you and your crew to shower and then come clean your gear. Like, it's more important you get that off of you than your gear. And then thoroughly clean your PPE all the time. You know, after every fire, clean it and wipe the inside of your mask, wipe your SCBA. It's really basic stuff, doesn't take money. And so I'm really we have a couple of minutes now to answer questions. Before we step, I want to thank you for taking the time the last day of a conference to come and listen to us talk. And again, it's really refreshing to talk about women firefighters. We don't do that often, but also know that it's all encompassing. Again, you know, breast cancer as a metaphor for all cancers. This is something that we are facing, and I feel like we're doing a good job with the help of the IFF, with you all here, with the scientists, with the advocates. So thank you, and thank you. I think we can open up.
We have time for some questions, but before we start leaving, I want to remind you to do your evaluations. And if you haven't gone to the back to do your continuing education scan, it's set up in the back for you to do that. Are there any questions from the floor?
Sarah,
You know, she said fine. She said fine. I mean, one of the challenges with the some of the implications of this type of these exposures is that you don't know until later. So she said, oh, I, have a totally normal kiddo, but
How old is she now?
I don't remember. Not that old.
And just as Massachusetts,
You do? Yes, that's wonderful. I think that must have come from last year. I needed to add that. Thank you.
That's
great.
awesome.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Eileen. I'm from Saginaw, Michigan. So the guy from Massachusetts who just talked, was it hard to get breast cancer added to your presumption?
timing is everything.
Right here.
Timing is everything, and right now, timing is everything. They did a lot of work with the international and the state unions and local. And we have some pretty effective legislative agents, reps, and timing is everything.
Okay. It took us 15 years to just get cancer presumption in Michigan. We have 10 different cancers. We don't have breast yet, and that's my goal is in Michigan. So I'll probably be getting your card because we'd like to get some. I'm sure we're going to be asked the questions about that. And then when you talked about people being pregnant and how long they waited, so I'm just curious for myself with my kids, both of them, I waited till I was 6 months. We did not have a policy in my department. I kept it really secret. I checked with my doctor. He didn't really know either, and he's like, as long as you feel okay. It was more like a balance and stuff. I was lucky I didn't really pop out, so people just thought I was getting fat. But, so anyway, and then that's another thing about how long you take off, right? So for me, it was a pride thing. I wanted until I get back. I actually didn't breastfeed because, look at me, right? But anyway, so I'm saying, no, I didn't, but I waited 8 weeks, but I burned my own time. And that's another thing that because I didn't want to go on disability. So even now, towards the end of my career, I'm still making up for that time. So I was just curious how much time a lot of you guys, or women, have had for pregnancy leave, like, and what you did.
I could just, with San Francisco, it's funny. It's like those questions of, for us, you get 12 weeks post if you don't have any time saved. But you have to burn all of your time to get those 12 weeks. When I was 25, when I came in, I happened to work with a woman firefighter, and she's like, save your time. To get time coming, use your holiday pay, just start to bank it. And at 25, I wasn't sure if I wanted kids or not. But because of that, I had a year off, but that was all my own time that I had saved. And so it is these, you are penalized in a sense of you get that time off. And I thought I would take a couple weeks, but then motherhood worked for me, and I thought, no. And so it's just, as we start to look at that, depending on your state, usually it's, I don't know, we don't have something for our department, but it's deferred to what the state laws are. And in California, you get those 12 weeks. I think you can get a few more if you have post, if you have problems post or what's
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm just sitting around and talking, especially if you're in a department without other women, it's helpful. My own situation, I didn't know what to do to go off. When I found out, we weren't planning it, and it was probably about 12 weeks when I remember literally hopping in the rig, going to a working fire, and in my head going, I don't want this to be a fire, I don't want this to be a fire, I don't want this to be a fire. And I was like, it's time to go. Like this, that's not my normal. And so the next day I did. I just thought, okay, it's hard. It's a lot of questions, and a lot of you don't have support for that.
Yeah. And that's true across the country,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
That's consistent. I will say San Francisco has some amazing studies that have come out on breast cancer. And so when I've talked to folks who are trying to get that at the state level, that kind of basic research has been helpful.
Yeah. Oh.
Yep.
Hey, good morning. My name is Bert Vergara. I'm with Osceola County, Local 3284. That's in Central Florida, for those of you who don't know. So in case you didn't know, July 1st in the state of Florida, we passed legislation for cancer coverage. So in that cancer coverage bill, we have 22 types of cancer. Two female cancers for ovarian cancer and also breast cancer.
Oh.
So I'm one of the members of an organization we created in Florida called the Florida Firefighter Safety and Health Collaborative. I know one of our brothers here from one of the chiefs from Palm Beach County is very familiar with that. So one of the things that we've done now for many years is we teamed up with the University of Miami Sylvester Cancer Center. And the collaborative effort is amazing because that's one thing that's worked for us significantly. So one of the things I would suggest, and it's been a significant hurdle for us to pass cancer coverage in the state of Florida, over 2 decades. So it's a huge milestone for us, and there's still obviously a lot of work to be done. What I would suggest, if any of you can team up with an organization such as Sylvester, Dr. Jeff Burgess, we work closely with him on a lot of the research, Kenny Fent from NIOSH, and get together with those scientists and those universities who are doing robust studies right now, and team up with them and get all that clinical research done. So that way you can push the bill through state legislation, through your union, through the IFF. Our FPF organization, state organization, work very closely with the IFF and their team and their staff to try to get that law passed. We went from presumptive law to cancer coverage law because it failed every time.
Yeah.
So in the state of Colorado, they passed cancer coverage law versus presumptive law. And now we did. So we had a bipartisan bill passed in the state, and we have that now with 22 types of cancers. So you guys can find that at fpfpe.org at our state organization. You can reach out to me if you want after the meeting. I can give you my card. And we have also, our collaborative has a web page. We're in social media. You guys want to reach out, utilize all the resources we have, from post-decon training to mental wellness, peer support. We're doing this very aggressively in the state of Florida right now, and there's 2 or 4 other states that are trying to put together collaborative teams as well. So just wanted to share that with you guys.
Hi, I'm Donna Roddick from City of Seattle. This is my 39th year, and I've got 2 kids, 25 and 27. For my daughter's 27, and she's severely disabled. And I was with her 6 months. I think I worked 6 months. It was 27 years ago. So, but her disability is a really rare epileptic condition. For 20 years we didn't know, but she finally got a diagnosis. So I kind of feel like, oh gosh, maybe it wasn't that. But at the same time, I'm the disability officer right now, and I have 3 women who are pregnant, and 2 of them went 6 months. And I mean, I didn't even know. And I know these women. So if you take anything back to your groups, let them know. Don't do it. Don't spend a minute of your pregnancy. And I'm glad about you telling me about that breastfeeding information, because one of my gals is going to work right now, and I'm going to be telling her that, because I never pumped and dumped. I came right from the fire to the pump in the station.
Yeah.
So not even that part, that never even crossed my mind at all. And I wasn't, 27 years ago, I wasn't afraid. Wasn't afraid of what I was getting into. Didn't really even know.
Didn't know.
Yeah, so anyway, take it back to them and make them safer. And City of Seattle, just about 3 years ago or so, I'm not sure exactly how long, we have 520 hours of PPL for the City of Seattle, for the mom and the dad.
Oh, good.
And they don't have to trade the hours or anything. They can be off together. One of my gals is married to a fireman, so they're both using that leave now.
That's awesome.
I'd just like to say the Healthy In, Healthy Out that came out of Seattle is it's a resource that we use all the time. So you guys, along with Boston and Massachusetts, are doing great work in this movement.
The year I came in, 20 women for our breast cancer survivors.
Yeah, exactly.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Patton from Commonweal, doing a lot of work with firefighters for a number of years, death studies and biomonitoring. And my question is there any kind of repository of all the kinds of studies that on women firefighter reproductive health that's easily accessible, that Sarah, that you do, and Jeff Burgess and the ones from the Women Biomonitoring Collaborative, Firefighter Biomonitoring Collaborative, that are accessible that firefighters could go to a simple form, and this research deals with this, and it's as useful for this kind of presentation for presumptive disease laws or whatever. That's one question. And then the other question is there any mechanism available to firefighters so they can engage directly in campaigns to get some of these chemicals that are unnecessary out of household products, that when they burn, they're going to release these products, we think, whether it's PFAS or phthalates or PBDEs or the organophosphate flame retardants, the ones that are very, very harmful to firefighters. Is there any kind of mechanism so firefighters know these are the chemicals we need to get rid of, and here are the legislative initiatives or the groups that are working on this? And my third comment is these are great presentations, and I learned a lot, and thank you so much. It was great stuff, so thanks a lot.
Well, I'll take the first question because it's easy to answer no. Yeah, although I will say I've talked to Jim and also to Pat about pulling those resources together. Where can we pull what we do know about reproductive health and what we do know about the health of women firefighters. So we've started that conversation. There's also been, when we were recently down at Florida at the cancer summit, there was discussion about pulling anyone who's interested in the topic of women firefighters together and kind of like, where are we at? What do we need to do? So it's all, really it's kind of early in its infancy, although I will say that FEMA, through their funding mechanism, has done a great job about, they're now like, well, what about women? What about women? What about women? So, which I love, but it's a hard, because you're trying to pull together, women from nowhere is San Francisco. So yeah, unless we all just study San Francisco, which I'm sure you would love.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And your question,
I wish I could answer that question, Charles. Is there a way that we know how to jump on, how to do some of this policy work? I think that maybe it's a question that I can start to look at, and I think with the help of Tony Stefani, he's very connected, maybe we can start to come up with a resource for that, because I really do agree for both of those things of having that be at our fingertips. Mm-hmm. So if you depend, no matter where you are, I have a firefighter that was a New Hampshire firefighter. She didn't have any other women in her department, called me. She came down with breast cancer, went into her department, and she's filling out the paperwork for that. And, she just happens to be, and said, is this work related? And the secretary sitting behind the desk said, no, it's not work related. And she hit that box and now is fighting for that. She doesn't have any resources. She contacted us somehow, but to have that more at our fingertips, where we're in this information age, we should do that. And maybe even, talking with who you presented with yesterday, Raquel Siegel, who is the new health and safety for the IFF, maybe I'll contact her and see if she can't help.
Yeah, and I know Jim and Pat have been doing a lot of work, so hopefully.
Yeah, I just want to add to those answers. Jim Brinkley, Assistant to the General President for Technical Assistance and Information Resources. The repository for all of the cancer studies, whether it's for women firefighters, male firefighters, and alike, is the IFF.
Yes.
Now, we don't post all of those studies on the website, so you can just download them and try to interpret them yourself. We go through the painstaking effort of interpreting them for you and providing fact sheets that link to all of those studies. So we'll talk about the 10 or 12 studies that we believe are most relevant for firefighters in cancer and give you a synopsis of them. And if you want the full study, we'll provide that as well. And then secondly, what are we doing to address these policies and get the chemicals out of the general population is we're working at the state level with all of our associations to pass legislation and improve legislation. And then also with our governmental affairs office, they're constantly working at the federal level to address it. I'm happy to hear that Michigan now has cancer presumption, and Florida as well. But I will tell you this, you're always looking for the next study. You always want the medical proof, and I'm here to tell you it is not about that. It is about the politics. We've had the science for many, many years, and we still have states with no coverage whatsoever. It is about your political operation, not about the medical evidence. Work on the politics, you'll get the medical evidence as support going forward.
Sorry, I know you guys want to get out of here. I'm Audrey Zarzak out of Newport, Kentucky, Local 45. is there any, I don't know the age of your women, but we always hear, oh, you're not old enough yet for screenings. Or you're young, so you don't need pap smears every 3 years. So is there any kind of progress or health screenings for us? Like, hey, you're a firefighter, so you need to get mammograms. You need to have annual pap smears. Is there going to be any kind of push for that? Like, we had a guy come down with cancer, and now we all get chest x-rays in our exams.
Right.
So are we going to be reactive, or are we going to try to be proactive with that? Like, is there going to be a push? Like, I'm not sure how the age of the women that...
The median age of our study participants was 43. So it's a little, you know, we have an aging population. They hired a lot of us women in 88 secondary to a court-ordered consent decree. It's why we quite have so many. So I know in San Francisco, or in my own doctor, because I'm a firefighter, she wanted to give me mammograms earlier. She wanted to do that. That's a little controversial, and I'm not, because there's all these different questions. Do mammograms really find it? I mean, do pap smears? But I think it's a really good question, and I don't know if anyone in here could answer that better. I can't, but for us, we're aging. We have you have young women coming in, but our population of women is aging, and we're seeing, the big thing for our study is that the cancer rates, breast cancer rates in San Francisco, they're all on premenopausal women, and it's breast cancer that you're seeing in postmenopausal. So most of the scientists, that's to them, they're going, oh, like your rates are high, but we normally see these in 60-year-olds, not 40-year-olds. So I think that most doctors, you should, I mean, if you could ask your own doctor, you're asking for a department to do that, I'm not sure about that, but ask your own doctor, hey, most doctors, I would think if your personal doctor would not say no, if you said, hey, can I get a mammogram early or not?
There are departments that are moving towards that, but I think some of it is just educating your own physician.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So you don't get your prostate
They
checked?
added breast cancer. They added mammograms to our annual screenings in San Francisco. They did to our women. Yes. Yes, 40. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Prezant from New York City Fire Department. Just a few statements. I think this meeting is great, by the way, so thank you all. And I think these are really important issues. I'd like to echo what Jim just said, that it's policy, not science. Because if you're looking at women issues, the science for firefighters, all right, will be very difficult to achieve, all right? The science for the entire firefighter workforce is very, very clear. Cancer is increased, and it's good to talk about the entire workforce. That includes you, all right? But science for females is going to require a large number of female firefighters. I think it's great, all the studies that you're doing, but from a scientific viewpoint, they will always be contested by the people that don't want to include you, because you will not have scientific statistical significance. So it's policy, it's politics, it's not the science. Don't wait for the science. Fight for the policy, because all firefighters should be treated the same. Second point that I wanted to make was about cancer screening, and then I have a third point, I'm sorry, but I'm trying to be quick. Second point about cancer screening. We all want more cancer screening, and there's going to talk going on at 11 o'clock about cancer and cardiovascular screening. Nobody is discriminating against women firefighters when we're talking about cancer screening. Mammograms are included in NFPA 1582 and the Wellness Fitness Initiative. So are pap smears. However, the question for men and women, it's the same question. Should it happen earlier? Is a very complicated question, all right? Because there are more false positives as your age of screening decreases. So if you ask for screening at a young age, you have to accept the fact, because medicine is medicine, that you will pick up a lot more false positives, which require a lot more anxiety, a lot more biopsies, and a lot more complications. You can't have one without the other. I'm not stating right now that it should be 40 or 35 or 45. I'm not saying that. I'm stating a scientific fact. No matter what age you choose for any disease, the younger you bring the age down, the more false positive. You can't scientifically have one without the other. Make your own decision, accept it, but don't be surprised by it. Third issue, final issue, is about pregnancy. Here I think, because there are no male pregnant firefighters, you've got a real issue. And frankly, I think, you know, you can ride the wave on the cancer thing. You're going to get all the same cancer coverages that male firefighters get, including soon breast cancer, which should have, and cervical cancer, which should have been there right from the beginning. That wave is going to cover you, all right? The pregnancy thing is something you got to advocate separately, all right? Because the men are not going to be there, all right?
Yeah.
All right? And it is an absolute travesty the way women are treated in the United States when they're pregnant, all right? You mentioned that you had to burn all your medical leave and vacation time. That is true in New York City. It's true for firefighter females. It's true for every female, all right? I can't remember whether they used to get 6 weeks. I think they increased it to 12 recently, but they got to burn all their stuff. Hospital employees in my hospital, same deal, all right? They got to burn, so that's not even a governmental employee. They got to burn all their medical leave. How terrible is that? Especially when you're going to be a working mom and your kid is sick and you're going to have to use that medical leave to take them to the doctor or to take care of them. It makes no sense. If we want children in America, we need to expand pregnancy leave, especially in physically demanding jobs where it is asinine to think that most women, I understand there are professional athletes that get back to the tour in 6 weeks, but most women are not super athletes, and it's asinine to think that you can carry bunker gear up steps, etc., 6 weeks after pregnancy. It's crazy, all right? But the final thing about pregnancy is an interesting issue. We as physicians are hampered, we as physicians doing duty determinations for female firefighters, we are hampered by federal regulations, all right? So again, we need your help. I'm not quite certain whether you want to help us with this, but we need your help in that. As the science begins to develop to prove what you're all saying, which is being exposed to all this shit on the fire ground, despite PPE when you're pregnant, we would like to have light duty spots for you, all right, and mandate it. We're not allowed to do that. But
Thank you.
we're not allowed to do that.
I think that was so well said, and I thank you. We're over time, and I want to respect your time, so.
One last question
Yes.
that came from one of our online viewers.
Thank you.
Was, since this is considered occupational hazard, would the insurance pay for 100% of it?
Wait, pregnancy or
Pregnancy?
Not pregnancy.
I was like, what? Yeah, I'll advocate for that.
Yes.
Yeah. We'll pay for what?
For breast cancer?
Cancer.
Oh,
Right.
It depends on where you are.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it depends.
Absolutely depends. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Come on up if you had questions we didn't get to. Thank you. Oh, yeah, definitely.